Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, very good evening to everyone. So, from past 8 days, I think you have been hearing about the lectures regarding the various millets, their health benefits, and their processing aspects. So, we all know that millets are healthy, and we need to consume these millets. And government is also encouraging now everyone in order to eat these millet crops. But the first thing is, in order to have the demand is increasing, but we need to have the supply also. So from the farmer's point of view, we need to encourage them in order to have good management practices so as to increase the productivity of these millet crops. And we need to encourage the farmers in order to go for these millets cultivation. So we know that it's health benefits, but now we need to encourage the farmers what are the benefits for him in order to cultivate these millet crops. So these millets are climate resilient crops, means they are having the capacity to endure various weather vagaries. And these are C4 crops, means even though now we are hearing about the climate change, increasing carbon dioxide levels and increasing temperatures, more incidence of droughts. So in these aspects, these millets act as resilient crops. They can withstand these weather vagaries. They can utilize the increased CO2 levels also, and they convert into photosynthesis so that the productivity was not hampered. And they don't need much water. They don't need much fertilizers also. And for most of the crops, they need good fertile soils. But for these millet crops, they can be grown in soils with very low marginal fertility also. And these millets are multi-purpose, means not only for the consumption of grain, but they can be used for their cattle feed, for their poultry feed, and for other industrial uses also. So for the farmers, it will have more benefit. It will give more benefit if they cultivate these millet crops in the long run. So here we can see the climate resilience nature of these millet crops. As you can see, the millets, even though the temperatures are increasing and there is an incidence of drought, still the millets will be able to withstand that drought period. And again, they recoup when the conditions are favorable and they give good yields. But whereas the cereal crops, which are little susceptible to these weather vagaries, they ultimately wilt and die. So this slide you might have seen from almost many presenters, like the water requirement for these millet crops. Since these millets, they do not require much water, like they need only 1/3 to 1/4 of the water that is needed to cultivate the rice and sugarcane. Means if the farmers are going for rice and sugarcane with the same amount of water, they can go for 3 crops of these millet crops. So for the farmers, in the aspect of benefit point of view also, since they don't need much water, so resource poor farmers which are not having much irrigation facilities, they can go for these millets cultivation. And when we see where the climatic requirement for these millet crops, usually most of the crops will have some tendency towards certain climates. Like wheat, if we see, they can be grown only in the conditions where there is little cold weather. And for rice, they need humid weather. So for all the crops, there are certain climatic requirements. But the main advantage for these millet crops is that they can be grown in a wide range of climatic conditions. These are very hardy crops that they can withstand extreme levels of, means not extreme cold, they can withstand the extreme cold temperatures, but the growth will be little hampered. But in order to have a good growth, they need a temperature of 20 to 35 degrees centigrade. And even the rainfall requirement also, minimum rainfall requirement is 35 centimeters in order to get a good crop for these millet crops. And when we come to the soil requirement also, as every crop will be having certain preference for the soils. Like if we take the groundnut crop, they need light sandy soils in order to get good crop yields. And for cotton, they need heavy soils to get good crop yields. But these millets, they can be cultivated from either sandy loam soils to black cotton soils. Any range of soils, they can be cultivated. But it doesn't mean that these crops can be taken in mountains or in stony soils. So as in other crops, for these millet crops, all the steps starting from the time of field preparation till harvesting, each and every step should be taken care in order to ensure higher yields. Farmers will say that millets are less productive. Rice, if we see, they'll get nearly 4 to 5 tons per hectare. But when we take these millet crops, they'll say that we won't get even 1 ton per hectare. This is because of improper management practices. The varieties are having the potential to give yields up to 2 to 3 tons per hectare, but still farmers' yields are less than 1 ton per hectare. So the farmers need to ensure that proper care is taken at each and every management practice so that the yields can be enhanced. Before cultivating these millet crops, the first step is selecting a proper variety. So if we are cultivating certain crop for our location, we need to ensure that the variety is suitable for our locations. AICRP and IMR has recommended certain varieties for each every state. So farmers need to select those varieties in order to get higher yields. And in spite of going for normal local varieties, he should select some high yielding varieties so that the productivity can be enhanced. So these are the list of certain varieties in each crop that farmers can choose in order to get higher yields for these millet crops. So after selecting the variety, the first step is to ensure proper field preparation. Since these millet crops, except sorghum and pearl millet, for rest all the millet crops, we can see that the seed size is very small. So if the field was not prepared properly, the germination will be affected. So we need to ensure that the field is properly plowed 2 to 3 times, harrowing is done, and leveling is also properly done in order to ensure fine till. So if there is a fine tilt, the probability of germination is more and plant stand will be optimum so that yields will be higher. Then method of sowing also. The usual practice for these millet crops is broadcasting. Most of the farmers will go for broadcasting the millet seeds. So in spite of this broadcasting, if we follow other improved methods like line sowing, transplanting, ridge and furrow and broadbed and furrow, the yields can be enhanced. And even in these methods of sowing also, the farmer should take care that the seed was not sown deeper than 2.5 to 3 centimeters depth, because the millet seed is very small. So if it is dropped at a deeper depth, the germination, the seedlings can't emerge easily and the plant population will be affected. So here you can see the various methods of sowing in these millet crops. The first is broadcasting. Like here on a well prepared land, the farmer will just broadcast the seeds without any proper spacing. The next method is line sowing, where we'll ensure a proper spacing between the lines and also between the plants. And the next method is ridge and furrow. Here the field will be laid out into ridges and furrows. And the sowing can be taken up either on the ridges or in the furrows. The next method is broad bed and furrow system. Here it's similar to ridge and furrow, but except that the broad beds will be laid and furrows will be there and sowing will be taken up on the beds. Then the other method is transplanting. This method is usually practiced for finger millet only. So there are certain studies that transplanting crop gives 20 to 30% higher yields than the direct sown crop. So Gully method. This is one specialized method and mostly followed in finger millet only. You all might have heard about the system of rice intensification, SRI method, right? So this method is similar to SRI method, where first we'll raise the nursery beds, and from the nursery beds, these finger millet seedlings, 12 days old seedlings will be transplanted into the main field at a spacing of 45 by 45 centimeters. Means line to line it is 45 and plant to plant also 45 centimeters. And after transplanting, this wooden plank will pass this wooden plank over the crop nearly 5 to 7 times. So by passing this wooden plank, the apical dominance will be reduced and it will encourage production of more number of tillers. So because of this, tillers will be increased and the crop yields are increased. And this practice is mostly followed in in Haveri district of Karnataka, but now it has now spread to many areas also. Now some parts of AP, Orissa, they are practicing this Gully method and they are realizing nearly double the yields of normal crop. And the advantage of this Gully method is that they need only less seed rate, like 1 kg per acre, and the grain yields are increased. And one drawback for this is, since the tillers will be more, productivity will be more. So the farmers need to apply little more water in order to sustain those tillers. So if the farmer is having good irrigation facilities, they can take up this method in order to increase the millet yields. Then coming to the time of sowing, these millets can be grown in all the 3 seasons, like in Kharif, Rabi season, or in summer season. So if you are taking up in Kharif season, sowing should be done with the onset of monsoon, maybe in the month of June, July. And Rabi crop will be sown in the month of September to October, and summer crop in the month of January to February. But in some states like Bihar and UP, these crops are grown as catch crops. means in between two main crops, if they are having a period of 2 months, then they will take certain short duration varieties and they'll grow the crop in between those two main crops. So they'll get extra benefit of the catch crop. So some short duration varieties they'll sow between two seasons and they'll take the additional advantage. And the seed rate, the recommended seed rate for sorghum is, if it is for line sown crop, 7 to 8, and for pearl millet line sown it is 4 to 5 kg per hectare. For transplanted crop it is 2 kg per hectare. For finger millet line sown crop, it is 5 to 6 kg per hectare. For transplanted crop, it is 4 kg per hectare. And for rest all the small millets, if they are going for line sowing, it is 5 to 6 kg per hectare. And for broadcasting, will take 8 to 10 kg per hectare. Then sowing also, it again depends on the method of sowing. Like if it is normal line sown crop, we can say 20 to 30 between the rows and 10 to 15 between the plants. And if it is ridges, some will be, for small millets, will leave 45 centimeters between the ridges. And for major millets like sorghum and bajra, it will be 60 centimeters between the ridges. But these are certain recommended spacings that have been tested and have been proved to be effective in getting higher yields. So for sorghum, it is 45 by 15 centimeters. For pearl millet, it is 40 by 15 centimeters. For finger millet, 22.5 by 10 centimeters. And for rest of the small millets, it is 20 to 22.5 by 10 centimeters. Then coming to the nutrient management. Usually these millets are organic in nature. Mostly farmers won't apply any chemical fertilizers. So for almost all the farmers, we suggest not to apply any chemical fertilizers. Instead of applying chemical fertilizers, they can use certain organic methods in order to sustain the crop. And except for sorghum and pearl millet, for rest and finger millet, rest all other small millets like foxtail, kodo, little, proso, all these millets are not having hybrids. So even you apply more amount of fertilizers, still they won't respond in a way that other crops will be responding, because these local varieties and normal varieties won't respond to higher application of fertilizers. So even if you apply more fertilizers, the yields won't be increased. So that's why we suggest the farmers not to apply fertilizers for all the small millets. And instead, before land preparation, before a final land preparation, they can go for application of farmyard manure or compost at the rate of 8 to 10 tons per hectare. And fertilizers also for sorghum and pearl millet. First, they can go for soil testing, and based on the soil test values, they can go for fertilizer application. The usual recommended blanket recommendation is like for major millets, it is 80-40-40, and for small millets, it's 20-20. And instead of this application of chemical fertilizers alone, they can adopt integrated nutrient management. Because we'll say that if we go only with organic methods, the yield is getting reduced for the initial few years. So we are suggesting them to go for integrated method, where they'll combine both the chemical fertilizers but also organic fertilizers and crop rotations, green leaf manures, vermicompost, biofertilizers. So all these methods they can incorporate so that they can sustain not only the crop productivity but also the soil health. And now there are certain leaf color chart based nitrogen management. Based on the leaf color chart, we can schedule the timing of the fertilizer application, and we can use nano fertilizers and liquid biofertilizers, which are more effective in terms of drought situations. Then coming to the weed management practice, if we ask any of the millet farmer, they'll say that we won't take up any weed management, because they'll just sow the crop and they'll go for harvesting. In between, they won't even go for weed control. They won't even apply for irrigation. Most of them won't even apply fertilizers also. But for these millet crops, during the initial 20 to 30 days, the growth of these millet crops is very slow. So during that time, if the weed growth is more, then whatever the nutrients and moisture that is available in the soil will be taken up by the weeds and the crop growth will be hampered. So we suggest the farmers to grow for weed control at least during the initial 20 to 30 days. So that after that, even after 45 to 50 days, even if there is weeds, it won't affect much with the crop yields. So during the initial 20 to 30 days, he can take up hand weeding or some intercultivations. Now there are power weeders and cycle weeders. The farmers can utilize these advanced methods in order to control the weeds. And now there are certain robo weeders also, which are effectively controlling the weeds in the crop rows. In IMR, we are testing even drones in order to apply the herbicides, but these herbicide spray we are doing only for the major millets like sorghum and pearl millet. So these are certain recommended herbicides for sorghum and pearl millet. Most of the herbicides that we recommend are only for the sorghum and pearl millet, but not for the small millets. Because atrazine, which is the most effective pre-emergence herbicide in these millet crops for the sorghum and pearl millet, it's showing some phytotoxicity issues in small millets. So for farmers, we are not suggesting to apply any herbicides for small millet crops. Then coming to the irrigation aspect, mostly these millets are grown as rain-fed crops, so farmer won't apply any irrigation. But if we are having the facility to provide irrigation, then it's always advisable to give life-saving irrigation at least at the stage of flowering or grain filling. And if he is having the possibility to apply 3 to 4 irrigation, then he can apply at critical stages like tillering, flowering, grain development. So critical stages are those at that means if we apply irrigation at those critical stages, then the yield will be enhanced. So we always suggest the farmers to apply at the critical stage. And if he is going for summer or rabi crop, then he need to ensure that he can provide minimum of 2 to 5 irrigations in order to get good yields of the millet crop. And these millets, as since most of these are grown as rain-fed crops, we suggest the farmers to grow for moisture conservation practices. Like he can adopt these compartmental bunding, ridge and furrow, as I mentioned earlier. So these methods will be advantageous if the irrigation facilities are not proper, if there are no much rainfall in their areas, then they can go for these moisture conservation practices so that whatever the little rain that will fall can be utilized for the millet crop growth. And they can use organic mulches, plastic mulches in order to check the evaporation and all, and to conserve the moisture. And hydrozole, they can apply hydrozole and biochar, which are effective in retaining the soil moisture. And instead of going for conventional flood irrigation method, they can go for sprinkler and drip irrigation methods, which can enhance not only the productivity but will reduce the water application, and they can enhance the water use efficiency. So even though there is much demand for these millet crops, even though we are educating the farmers, we are educating the consumers, still the area under these millets cultivation is decreasing. It's not increasing, but still it is decreasing. So the main reason is like lack of support to the farmers from the government and also from the system also. Like we need to support the farmers not only in terms of production practices, but also government should support by providing them a proper minimum support price, by providing them buyback arrangement, and also by providing them processing facilities, because most of these small millets need processing. So the farmers do not get these processing facilities easily in their area. So many are not coming forward to cultivate these millet crops. And the other issue is that the productivity level, since they say the productivity level is very low, and they can usually for the farmers, the main source of income is from the crop. So for them, they'll cultivate the crops which are more beneficial. So we are suggesting the farmers in the initial stages, they can go for these intercropping systems. Means no need to replace the main crop, but to grow few lines of the millets as intercrops in the main crop, so that they can get additional advantage of the intercrop and they can get the main crop yield also. And these millets, since these are short duration, they don't need much resources, they don't need much water, so they are more compatible with any crop. So we can grow these millets along with pulses, cotton, millet intercropping they can take up. So these are certain popular intercropping, like small millets can be intercropped with red gram, and then cowpea, soybean, buckwheat. So these are certain popular intercrops. So we can suggest the farmers, at least in the initial stages, to go for millets as intercrops. So while cultivating these crops as intercrops, the farmer himself will realize that the millets are more easy to cultivate than rest of the crops. So eventually he can grow these crops as main crops also. So in this way, we can increase the cultivated area for these millet crops. And when it comes to the harvest also, cultivating the crop is one difficulty, and harvesting itself will become a major step. Because if we take up all these practices timely and correctly, but still if we won't harvest the crop at proper time, then all the efforts are wasted. Because for small millets, the one of the major issue is shattering. So if he crosses the physiological maturity stage, then most of the seed will be fallen in the ground itself and the yields will be reduced. So once the if he sees that there is yellowing of the leaves, and if the grain is hard and turns to brown color, he can see the indices for those physiological maturity, and he should cut the crop at proper time so that he can get higher yields for these millet crops. And usually these millet crops, they'll take from 70 to 120 days time in order to get to come to harvest. Like except kodo millet, which will take nearly 140 to 150 days, rest all crops will come within 3 to 4 months. So, and even harvesting also, instead of going for manual harvesting, now there are certain mechanical harvesters, reapers. So they can utilize these facilities in order to have timely harvesting of their crops. So, thank you. Since the time is a constraint, I just covered only the important aspects.
Thank you so much, madam. Very informative session.